long enough to... Statute of limitations expired on this.
Nobody's ever explained to her you got to be careful what you write down.
Are all the books the same?
Nobody looking at the wow, man, get those books now.
Everybody's grabbing the books.
That's all right, that's all right. I figured it would be more interesting that way. I was just trying to like spice it up a little bit.
You did that.
All right, well, like I said, the statute of limitations has expired, so it's okay. Let me just get this going here. I actually wrote it down. This is a topic that obviously I can go on and on and on about. This was an entire year of my life, and I got the password wrong. So there's a lot of information there. It's just... Okay. So, as most of you know, my introduction to Rotary was through a Rotary Youth Exchange program, which at the time was just called Rotary Youth Exchange, and I'll let you know this was my card that I had passed out. I probably passed out about 500 of those cards throughout my year, so they're floating all over the place. And it's why I'm so passionate about the international aspect of the Rotary program. GRSP, just to kind of give you a little bit of background, is actually a program that's unique to Georgia. And it's not the same program that I'm talking about today. So there's going to be differences, but I would welcome any questions about highlighting about the differences between the two programs. But I really want to kind of give you some of my experiences that I had while a Rotary Exchange student and focus how Rotary was involved in that year. And for full disclosure, I am recording this today because that was due to high demands from people that were overseas who I know, had I given them enough time, would have attended this speech. To listen, but they are scattered in Finland. I actually got some comments from friends in Nepal, Japan, Australia, and Sweden. So on each table, as you noticed, I have provided my scrapbooks for you to look through, and I'm hoping it will spur some questions and some discussion. Any questions I'm open to. Again, I stress that the statute has expired. So I'm welcome to that. To start at the beginning, my father was a Rotarian, and he brought home the application to be a Rotary Exchange student, actually for my brother, who at the time was a senior. I was a junior. He decided he didn't want to do it, and I said, well, I want to do it. So my dad said, okay, go ahead, you can apply. And I was not prepared at what an intensive interview experience that was going to be. And I went to this interview, and at the end of a day-long interview of individual, group interview, I just knew that I hadn't been accepted because I had felt wholly unprepared for it. And sure enough, I was not. So, as determination has never been one of the things that one of my weaknesses, so I knew next year I had a lot more work to do if I really wanted to do this program. So the next year I was ready to go. I knew my state senators. I knew how many delegates came from New York State. I knew where the San Francisco Bridge was. So these were all questions that I had the year before and did not necessarily know. I sure that I had gotten it, and when I got that call from Rotary, sure enough I had. However, they were going to be sending me to Finland. Not one of my top 5 country picks, I must say. I had no idea. I knew it was over there somewhere. I knew it was northern, but I really didn't know where it was. So my first step was to whip out the atlas and try to figure out where I was going for the next year. The first step was, I knew that, I had taken French for 5 years, so all the countries that I had picked were French-speaking, and I was pretty sure they didn't speak French in Finland. I wasn't positive. So, but I had worked so hard and waited so long because, a year, when you're 17, a year is forever. So I was going. So before we left, Rotary actually, and again, I'm trying to highlight the participation of Rotary, but Rotary actually hosted a weekend-long kind of conference in Niagara Falls, New York, where they invited all of the outgoing exchange students in New York State, as well as all the incoming exchange students that were here from other countries, and kind of give us a crash course in how long, what it was going to be like. And it was really cool to meet all the students from all the different countries. It was just a really neat experience, and I was really excited. So the next, and just to give you a sense, the cost of this program, from a Rotary standpoint and from my standpoint, I had to come up with the funds, or my family had to come up with the funds for a round-trip ticket, and that was it. I mean, that was my responsibility monetarily, was to come up with the ticket. Rotary provided housing in the form of host families. And food and everything that went along with that. So and they also provided me with a stipend, which amounted to about $45 a month. So that's all I got from Rotary, and that was plenty, and it was enough to get me over there. My first week in Finland, what they did is they had, the Rotary again hosted a week-long crash course in Finnish culture, language, so that we would kind of know what to expect before they sent us out into the Finnish countryside. And generally they placed in English-speaking students in Finland because Finnish, a lot of Finns, I mean, they mostly all can speak Finnish, although not everyone, but mostly. You'll find they start learning English at a very young age. So the other students with me in that week-long camp were mostly from America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and that's pretty much it. There was a couple from other countries, but really that's where they were mostly from. So I lived in my first family, a Rotary family, for 3 months. They had twin daughters, and one of the daughters was spending a year abroad in Pennsylvania. So they had an extra room, and I was their daughter for those 3 months. And this was fairly common that a family would be a host family when one of their kids would go on the exchange program, also usually through the Rotary program. So it was a normal, that was one of the payments, so to speak, that they also made to the program. And so right before I got there, the family actually had hosted an Australian exchange student. So I quickly became friends with the other two Australians who were in the same city as I was. And it was easy to be able to go to them, but I'll talk a little bit about that more. But so here I was in Finland, without a clue how to speak the language. I mean, yeah, I had a week-long crash course test, but has anyone ever heard Finnish before? All right, well, let me give you an example. So normally, how I would introduce myself when I would go out, I would say, Minä olen Amy Klepper. Olen vaihto-oppilas New Yorkin osavaltiosta. Any idea? It sounds nothing like English. It sounds nothing like any of the Romance languages. And what I did say was, of course, my name is Amy Klepper, because that was my name at the time. That was a little trick. Klepper. So you can see why I changed my name. And that I was an exchange student from New York State. And I always added the state part because people conjured up connotations of New York City that was just, very different from my experience living in New York. So really no similarity. It's a language that actually dates back 2,000 years and has not changed back very much in those 2,000 years. And it's closest to Hungarian. So it's very difficult. Even the grammar is different. You know how we have prepositions and we add in and of and by in front of words? Well, they add it to the word. So the word just keeps getting longer and longer and longer. And the way they make a word plural is there's an I in it somewhere. I don't know where. It's in there somewhere. So when you see an I, you always wonder, is that word plural or is that I there for another reason? It's just very, very difficult language. So even looking words up in the dictionary is very hard because you got to know the root word. And in the beginning, you have no clue. You can't look things up. There's just no way to do it. So completely different world. So yes, I tended to flock to the other two. Oh gosh, I just went to the back of my. I tended to flock to the other two Australian exchange students. While they didn't exactly speak the same language I did, it was close enough. No, they did not. So, and I did eventually start to learn the language. And when, see, this exchange year for the Australians is actually January to January, because that's when their school year runs. And for the Americans and Canadians, it was July to July. And so when the Australians left, I had to make a choice, and I had to decide, was I going to go seek out the new Australian exchange students, or was I going to focus on Finland? Because I learned a lot about Australia those first 5 months, and I really wanted to learn more about Finland. So I did. I did not go find the other Australian exchange students, and I really tried to focus on Finland. But I did actually get pretty good at it in the end. And this is just jumping to the very end here. I remember the first time I really tried to speak Finnish in public, on my own, without any help. I wanted to know, I had a message, I got home from school, and there was a note, and there was a package at the post office, and it was from my mother, and I still wanted that package. I'd only been there about 3 weeks, and I was like, oh, I want that package, but I have no idea where the post office is. This is the days before the internet, guys. No internet. And no way email. This was a very different world. When I was over there, I was secluded in this world. Even calling home cost $1 a minute on the phone, and I couldn't do that to my host family, because if I called home, I was talking for a good 20, 25 minutes, and that doesn't sound like a long time, but $20, $25, I only got $45 a month, remember? So, I mean, it was expensive to do that. So, I was determined. I was going to find this post office. So I looked up my phrase book, and I was like, okay, practicing, where's the post office? Where's the post office? Where's the post office? And I started walking in the general direction where I believe the post office to be. And here I see this person coming down the road, and she's walking pretty fast, and she looks like she's probably in a hurry, and she's holding stuff in her hands. And I'm like, no, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. And I walked up to her, and I said, anteeksi, tiedätkö missä on posti? Which was a perfect Finnish accent. I mean, I knew I had nailed it. The problem was, she then proceeded to tell me where the post office was. Didn't think about that. I had no idea what she said. I was just sitting here going, and I said, Kiitos. And I just turned and walked away, and I said, God, I wasn't thinking about that part of it. You know, I knew how to say it, but I did not know what she said. I mean, her hands were full, and she was nodding in a general direction. And I did not find that post office before it closed. I found it about 10 minutes after. I was very upset. So, anyway, I mean, I keep going to this, and it's going away. Sorry. I'm really trying to stay on track here, because I can go off and on a tangent here. It's funny. I mean, part of the Finnish language is very interesting. They pronounce every single letter in the word. And so sometimes there's like 2 A's together, and you have to pronounce them both. Or 2 K's, and you have to pronounce them both. And if you don't, you say a totally different word. The difference between it's nice to meet you and it's nice to kill you is 1 letter. And it's an A that's right next to another A. So you gotta be really careful. And it's also, you have to put the stress on the first syllable of every word, and you can say it perfectly, and if your emphasis isn't on the right word, they just look at you like, this is a crazy American. So it was a very difficult language. Let's see. Another funny story that you don't think about happened at my second host family's house. Very first day I was there, everybody was leaving the house before I was, and my host mother looked at me and said, could you please before you leave, make sure the dog comes inside. And I said, absolutely, you know, I can oblige that. So I'm about to leave for school, and I go outside with a beautiful golden retriever, very obedient, sweet dog. And I said, come on girl, let's go in the house. She just looked at me. And it took me a couple of minutes to figure out what the problem was. She didn't speak English. Now what am I gonna do? I mean, I knew I couldn't pick up a 90-pound dog. I'd never had an animal before. I mean, I grew up with a rabbit. I didn't have, cats and dogs. And so I sat there, and it took me a long time, and I can't look things up in the dictionary. right? I mean, it's not going to be the right conjugation to say it. So I had to search, and I knew I had seen somewhere something. So I finally did find in my phrase book the word for come here. And sure enough, brought it out, looked at the dog, who's just, you know, looking at me all obediently. And I said, do it, Tommy. And as soon as I could say that, in the door. So, but that whole thing took about 20 minutes for me to figure out how to get the dog in the house. Minor details.
Where's that dog now? I'd like to.
You know, a funny story about the cat, I didn't include in here, but I'm going to go off on a tangent. The cat hated me there. I took over her room, and like she would just leave presents for me in the room, in the middle of the room, and it just would jump on the table, and she never did this when anybody else was around. And my host family thought I was crazy because I was like, why does this cat like get into the garbage and everything? And they're like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, seriously, every time I'm home that cat does something. And they're like, okay, you know. I went to visit 9 years later, and my host sister had moved into an apartment by herself and still had the cat. And when I came to visit, that cat ran away for 3 days. And she'd never done that before either, so I don't know what it was. But most people did speak English, and so it really wasn't necessary for me to communicate on a regular basis until I moved into my third host family. That family, I actually picked. They were not a Rotary family. Rotary had a third family for me set up, and the daughter actually got botulism and was really sick. And so I wasn't able to go to that family. And so I ended up finding my own family, and Rotary didn't like that very much. But it was a great experience because they didn't speak English to me. That family, one of the daughters had been an exchange student the year before, and I had become friends with her. And so I said, listen, this is where I want to go. I've been at this other family, and I've kind of overstayed my welcome. They had planned on me being there for 3 months. It's now been 4 months. We haven't found another family. So I went on my own and found this other family. And both mother and father had actually not failed English, but yeah, I think they failed English. And so they really did not want to speak English and were not comfortable speaking English with me. So I did learn a lot of Finnish in that house because it was necessary for me to communicate with them. And I also have that family, I love all my host families. I had host sisters, so I have a bunch of sisters out there who are still sisters to me. And that there was one girl there that we're still in contact now, but she was 12 years old at the time, and she just took care of me. I mean, she taught me so much Finnish, and she had only been taking English for like 2 years, maybe not even. She had only just learned English, so she was trying so hard to teach me Finnish. She would make me practice, and she was 12, so I was accommodating to her. So I really have it for all of my families, but especially for her. Rotary hosted several events for all of the exchange students while I was in the country. The first one, we went to Lapland. So there was probably I want to say there was probably 150 students in all of Finland at the time. And their first event was that we went to Lapland. And I don't know if any of you know this, but Santa does come from Finland. We actually went into the woods, and we're sitting at these little tables in the woods in Finland, snow everywhere, and these little elves came out of the woods and served us hot cider, glögi as it's called. And here comes, all of a sudden you hear these ching, 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 ching. Here comes a sleigh pulled by a reindeer, and there's Santa. So yes, Santa comes from Finland. I did not know that before I went to Finland. We also got to take a trip to what was then called Leningrad, now St. Petersburg. That was also a Rotary trip that was planned. And these trips were very inexpensive when you look at it. It was probably maybe cost about $200 per person. That we did bear that cost, so that is another cost that we bear. And I'm sure that there was some monies that was by the other clubs, but it was all the Rotary clubs, in Finland that pitched in for that. And we had some side trips that were more regional trips where we would go on a boat over to Sweden and see. We saw the Marriage of Figaro in Swedish. And at all those places, I would go and I would give a little speech to the Rotary, mostly all in English. But it was really kind of funny because when I was reading my journal, because I did keep a journal the whole year, every time I referenced Rotary, the words, oh boy, were in there, and I thought, Oh, that's too bad. But the reason mostly was because I didn't speak the language. I didn't know what they were saying most of the time. So it was really kind of hard for me to kind of get into it and talk to people. And so, but remember, these were the days, you know, before cell phones, before email. So I was really kind of secluded there. And it's funny because as I kind of reconnected with some of my friends, a couple of them in Australia, we were making comments back and forth on Facebook, and it was neat. Somebody posted an old picture of us, and then somebody else commented on it, and they were actually, they were in Australia, and they posted it, and I was online. So she was online in Australia, and I was online in here, and then all of a sudden we start getting comments from people in Finland. And so all at the same time, here we are, all on the, you know, making comments on this same picture, and I was like, this is so cool. But then I started thinking about it, and I was like, you know, I said, you know, it's kind of cool that we have this now, but I'm kind of glad that we didn't have it back then, because we really had to rely on each other, and we really had to, I mean, learn the culture there, and we weren't connected to our home really at all. But, you know, another important thing that I wanted, I wrote 250 letters. I actually counted every single one and when I wrote to everybody, and have a little calendar, and I know who I wrote to and whether they wrote back. And I received back 150 letters. And I think I learned more about my family in that year being away through letters than I would have if I had been home. Because we were really, you know, that was our only form of communication. So, and the other thing, I read a lot of books. Obviously, when I was sitting in class half the time, because I went to a high school, and I had graduated from high school, but I wasn't going to college yet, so I kind of had this year of in between, and so I don't really have to get grades there. So a lot of times, you know, when I'm in Finnish history class, like, what am I going to understand that? I would read books. And it was kind of neat because my dad would read books and then he would send them to me. And my dad, so I was reading the books that my dad had read. My dad loves to read. And when he finds something interesting or important, will highlight or underline the book. And so I learned so much about what was important to my dad by what he had underlined, you know? And it was really interesting. Another thing I want to point out is how much you learn about your country, or at least how it looks from the outside. It's very different and not something you can experience by being a tourist. Does anyone remember the show Married with Children?
Yep, great album.
Loved that show when I was here. I thought it should be banned when I was in Finland because this is what they thought America was all about. I watched that show from that perspective one day. It'll open your eyes a little bit. I mean, it really was. Al Bundy is constantly referring to the American dream and the American this, and it's really funny when you start to watch it from a little bit of a different perspective. I mean, I actually had one of my friends one time, you know, I said something like, oh, we don't have like nice Saabs as police cars, because that's what they have, because you make Saabs over there, you know. And so he was like, well, yeah, that's because you're always crashing them. I'm like, really? Do you really believe that? And he's like, well, yeah, right? And I'm like, no, we're not constantly crashing our police cars here. That's the movies. But that's the perspective that they had. I mean, and at that time, remember, no internet. Their only exposure was through TV shows or movies that they saw, and limited exposure to the, you know, the people that they met. So, I mean, so I have a lot more stories, but I don't want to necessarily go on and on. Does anybody have, and I have a kind of closing, but I want to, there's a couple of things I wanted to mention, but I want to make sure. Does anyone have any questions particularly? Did you have a chance to look at it in the picture?
Mark did.
Yeah.
The album I looked at, you were sitting very close to a lot of young men.
Uh-huh.
Did you have a boyfriend over there?
I did.
Okay.
I did.
One?
There were
Just one?
one, actually just one, and he was my boyfriend for the whole time. But there were actually 4 rules in Rotary that were kind of the unspoken rules. But it was, you can't have a job because you wouldn't have a visa for a job. You have to go home at the end of your year. So you had to have a round trip ticket because they didn't want you staying which a bunch of my friends actually did, and are still there. And you aren't supposed to drive, because obviously you don't have a driver's license. I did break that rule once. Right, that's recorded, right, statute of limitations. And you weren't supposed to have a boyfriend. So, but, again, we're gonna roll.
Wow, you rule breaker.
Yeah.
That 500.
That was,
Drinking
again,
underage obviously was okay to the
wait, I was 18. I wasn't underage. I was 18. So I left the day after I turned 18. So I was newly 18, but I was 18 and I was legal.
in Finland.
For one day.
In Finland, that's where I was. You know, I'll tell you what, I plan to bring my kids to Germany when they're 16 and teach them how to drink, because I really do think that's an important skill that I learned in Finland.
Where was your boyfriend from?
He was from Vasa, from Finland, and he spoke English very well. I actually met him in my French class. I convinced them to let me take French. That wasn't originally on my roster of classes, but you know, I said, listen, I would like to take more English classes because I would learn Finnish there, and maybe French because I know French. So they actually let me adjust my schedule. I was in a high school that hadn't had an exchange student before. So they really weren't sure what to do with me, and so it was a learning experience. They had a lot of high schools. They were smaller, and they were right down the street from each other. It was weird. The other exchange students went to different schools, and actually almost all of my sisters went to different schools than I did. And so the graduating class was usually about 40 or 50, so it was pretty small.
And how were you treated by your co-students?
Really well. You know, that was one of the things that struck me. There was not a lot of clickiness there. When they had a class party, for example, everyone was invited. It really did, just out of high school, it really did strike me. It was mostly all middle class though. Remember, it's a very socialistic country, and there wasn't a lot of extremes, you know, in terms of money. And when I actually lived there, the unemployment rate was under 1%, and it was a very strong economy. And so it really did strike me. They treated me wonderfully. You can see in some of the books, they actually would write me little notes and pass them to me in class, and how was your weekend? And the English is not perfect by any means, but they really tried hard to include me. And I remember one day getting a call early on from one of the people that said, we're doing a thing where we're making a video for the senior class. I wasn't actually in the senior class, because the senior class in Finland actually leaves school in February and studies for 3 months before they take their senior tests. So they didn't put me in the senior class, they actually put me in what was the junior class. And so they were like, well, we're going to make this video for the junior class, for the senior class, the exiting senior class, where we make fun of them and we do all this. So some of those pictures, you see people like sitting in garbage cans and all looking really funny, and that's what that was from. And I didn't know what was going on. I mean, I was there and I'm like, what are you doing? I mean, I really didn't know what was going on, but they included me because they were like, okay. So they really were, and then the last day of school, actually, I learned a lot of Finnish. I went to this last family in February, and I stayed there for the rest of the time. And I learned a lot of Finnish there, and people didn't realize how much I actually was understanding by the very end of the school year. And so I decided I was going to give a speech over the loudspeaker, because they had morning announcements, like, you know, and I was going to give a speech over the loudspeaker. And I wrote this two-page speech, actually the speech is in one of the books. And I read this speech thanking them for how well they treated me and how I just felt welcomed, you know, right away. And from that point forward, they wouldn't speak English to me. So, because they thought, well, surely if she can give this whole speech. They didn't realize I hadn't, you know, my host sister helped me write it, and I was just reading it. But, you know, they from May to July, I had a lot of people that said, you know, here we have been trying to speak English, and here you can speak Finnish. So, yeah, they did treat me very well. Well, all right, well, I have a little closing thing that I wrote about, why does he put that in here? My husband's an IT guy, and everything has to be password protected and all that kind of stuff. So some of the things, I mean, I've talked about some of the things it taught me, but certainly why I'm so passionate, it taught me how to be a guest. But it also taught me how to feel at home almost anywhere. It gave me connections literally all over the world. The world, I mean, it's changing, obviously, for better, for worse, and it's getting so much more important that we work together on a global basis. And, you know, to help fight the disease, hunger, all the things that as Rotarians we believe are important in order to make this a better world. And what better way than to encourage understanding, deeper relationships that will stand the test of time through these exchange programs. Rotary's mission is more than raising money for those that can't pay for it. It's about fostering these connections that's going to help us grow leaders all around the world that have similar goals and values and will help make tomorrow a better place through service above self. Thank you.